It's funny. Usually when we talk about measuring human capability or um, proving someone's readiness for a high-level role, we always look for something definitive. Like we want an X-ray.
Right.
You break your arm, the X-ray shows the jagged line, and the doctor can just point to it and say, there's the problem, and here's the exact solution. It's clean, it's visible, and it gives us this perfect map of the territory.
Oh, absolutely. We crave that kind of binary certainty in almost every aspect of professional development. I mean, you either have the engineering degree or you don't.
Yeah.
You either hit your quarterly sales quota or you fell short. We have built entire corporate ecosystems around these metrics that just, fit neatly onto a spreadsheet.
But the moment you step into the realm of human cognitive growth, and specifically the acquisition of a new language that X-ray machine completely breaks down, we're suddenly staring into a landscape that is just incredibly murky.
Yeah.
You can't just scan someone's brain and see a promotion to senior vice president waiting in the frontal lobe.
No, you really can't.
You can't point to a cluster of neurons and say, yes, there is the exact vocabulary required to negotiate a multicultural merger in Geneva.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. The cause and the effect are separated by thousands of hours of invisible internal labor. I mean, we know the outcome exists. We see bilingual professionals thriving everywhere, but tracing the exact mechanical path from learning a basic vocabulary word to sitting in that boardroom, well, that is a highly complex and honestly often misunderstood trajectory.
And that invisible trajectory is exactly what we are mapping out today. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are looking at this fascinating collision of data. Right here on the table, we've got a stack of sources that seem completely unrelated at first glance. We have intensive language course syllabuses from Mobility Friends. We have standardized testing guides from Cambridge English, pedagogical articles on language acquisition from ELT News, and My Linguistics.
Oh yeah, quite a mix.
Right. And topping it all off, a really blockbuster academic study published in, of all places, Computer Fraud and Security.
Which sounds crazy, but it ties together perfectly.
It really does. Because our mission today is to track the unbroken journey of language mastery. We're going to start from the most rudimentary physical building blocks of our environment, specifically the vocabulary of our houses, our furniture, the literal ground beneath our feet.
The absolute basics.
Exactly. And we are going to trace how that incredibly basic cognitive mapping scales up, how it rewires the brain's executive functions, and ultimately leads us to that academic study, which uses structural equation modeling to prove a direct, undeniable link between language proficiency and salary growth in the global financial sector.
It is quite literally a journey from the living room rug to the International Stock Exchange, and the through line connecting them is entirely cognitive.
And to you listening, whether you are currently in the trenches of learning a new language yourself, just trying to grasp the basics, or maybe you're an advanced professional managing a diverse multilingual team, we are unpacking the exact blueprint of how this works. We're stripping away all that vague advice about just immersing yourself and looking at the actual neurological and pedagogical mechanics of fluency.
And we should probably note that we are going to look very closely at the physical mechanics of speech today, too.
Oh, yes. The shadowing.
Right. A lot of the data we're examining deals with how advanced learners use highly specific descriptions of household settings to practice something called shadowing. So we will literally be breaking down the biomechanics of clear pronunciation and natural pacing, looking at why the mouth needs to map these words just as much as the brain does.
Let's start right there, actually, at the foundation. Because there's this massive paradox in language learning that I think trips up a lot of highly intelligent adults. I'm looking at the foundational vocabulary expectations outlined in the Cambridge English Assessment Guide. Specifically, we're talking about the pre-A1 starters to A2 flyers levels. And when you cross-reference that with the Oxford 3000 vocabulary list, there is this relentless, almost overwhelming emphasis on the home and materials.
It's almost entirely domestic vocabulary.
Yes. And here is my challenge to that pedagogical approach. Say I am a 40-year-old software executive, right? And I am relocating to Berlin to manage a major tech firm. Why on earth am I being handed a syllabus that forces me to learn the words for bookcase, fridge, and rug?
It feels like a waste of time to them.
It feels infantilizing. Why am I spending hours learning how to say the clock is next to the picture? Why not bypass all that domestic stuff and jump straight into the vocabulary of agile workflows, quarterly earnings, and boardroom negotiations? That's what I actually need.
It's a completely logical objection, and honestly, it's one that adult learners bring up constantly. The frustration is very real. You have this highly sophisticated adult mind, capable of deep abstraction, being forced to point at a picture of a kitchen like a toddler.
Right.
But bypassing that stage fundamentally misinterprets how the human brain encodes new linguistic systems. What's fascinating here is that according to the pedagogical research in the My Linguistics analysis, language simply cannot exist in a void. It has to attach to physical reality before it can scale to abstract reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. So it's a sequencing issue. You're saying the brain literally cannot process a concept like quarterly earnings in a new language until it knows the word for table.
It's really about spatial geometry and cognitive mapping. When a learner is at that A2 level, the framework dictates they must be able to refer to their immediate concrete surroundings. The Cambridge assessments, they don't just ask you to translate the word clock on a piece of paper.
What do?
They literally show a picture of a family eating breakfast in a kitchen or kids playing in a bedroom, and they ask the candidate to place an object card on a specific location within that scene. The brain is mapping the new linguistic code, these completely arbitrary sounds of a foreign language, onto a familiar, tactile, three-dimensional space.
Oh, I see. Because the concept of a quarterly earning doesn't actually exist in physical space.
Exactly.
It's an abstract concept built on top of other abstract concepts.
Precisely. You have to build the cognitive infrastructure with tactile reality first. Just look at the specific architectural inventory these early syllabuses demand. It's an exhaustive list of our physical environment.
Yeah, let me just read some of these off the list here. We've got apartment, armchair, bath, bathroom, bed, bedroom, bookcase, box, camera, chair, clock, computer, cupboard, desk, dining room, door, downstairs fridge, hall, kitchen, lamp, living room, mat, mirror, oven, picture, roof, rug, shower, sofa, stairs, toothbrush, towel, upstairs window.
Every single one of those is something you can touch, right? Something you can walk through or interact with physically in your daily life.
And that physicality is paramount.
It is everything at that stage. When you learn these words, you aren't just memorizing a dictionary definition. Your brain is actually firing the sensory neurons associated with sitting in an armchair or feeling the cold handle of a fridge. This creates a multisensory anchor for the new language. Without those tactile anchors, the abstract vocabulary you want to learn later has absolutely nothing to tether itself to. It just floats away.
That actually brings up the physical act of speaking itself, which is a huge part of these foundational levels. We mentioned shadowing earlier in the intro.
Yes, a crucial technique.
The sources detail how advanced learners use these exact concrete descriptions of household environments for shadowing practice to develop natural pacing. Can you break down the mechanics of that for me? Because shadowing isn't just mindlessly repeating words like a parrot, right?
Far from it. Shadowing is an incredibly intensive auditory and articulatory tracking exercise. Basically, the learner listens to a native speaker reciting a text and simultaneously, or with just a fraction of a second delay, speaks the text aloud.
So they were talking right over the recording.
Exactly. And they are trying to match the exact intonation, the rhythm, and the phonetic linking of the source audio. It is brutal on the brain's processing centers.
And they use basic sentences like, there are 2 armchairs in the living room.
They do, and the reason they use that specific concrete household vocabulary is to lower the cognitive load regarding the meaning of the sentence.
Oh.
If you already know what an armchair is, your brain can dedicate 100% of its processing power to the biomechanics of saying it, rather than trying to figure out what the word means.
Okay, let's unpack the biomechanics then. What is actually happening in the mouth and the throat when a learner shadows that sentence?
Let's take a sentence straight from the Cambridge Reading and Writing Assessment materials. A very simple one. The big window is open.
Okay,
Yeah.
The big window is open.
Right. Now, on paper, that looks like 5 distinct, isolated words. But in natural spoken English, it's a continuous stream of sound. English is a stress-timed language, which means we squish and stretch words to maintain a steady rhythm.
Right, unlike syllable-timed languages.
Exactly, unlike Spanish or Japanese, where each syllable gets roughly equal weight.
So a learner coming from a syllable-timed language is going to try to say, the big window is open, like a robot.
Exactly. They isolate every sound. Shadowing forces their articulatory muscles, the tongue, the lips, the jaw, the vocal folds, to physically adapt to a new rhythmic timing. And then there's the phonetic linking.
How does that work in that sentence?
Look at the phrase window is. A native speaker doesn't stop after the W sound in window. They insert a very subtle gliding consonant to bridge the vowels. It becomes window-wise.
Window-eye. Yeah, you physically cannot say it at a natural speed without that microscopic bridge.
And you can't learn that bridge from a textbook. You have to train the muscle memory. Let's look at another one. There is a lamp on the bookcase.
Okay, there is a lamp on the bookcase.
The stress in the compound word bookcase falls heavily on the first syllable, bookcase. If a learner stresses the second syllable, like bookcase, it sounds completely unnatural to a native ear, even if the grammar of the sentence is absolutely perfect.
Or the consonant clusters. The sources use spatial commands a lot, like put the clock next to the picture.
Oh, that cluster in next to is a phonetic nightmare for many learners.
Because of all the consonants packed together.
Right. You have an X sound, which is really a K, and an S sound followed immediately by a T, and then another T from the word to next to. In natural, rapid speech, those T sounds assimilate. It almost becomes a single, held T next to. Shadowing trains the tongue to take those phonetic shortcuts automatically.
So by forcing adult learners to shadow descriptions of a kitchen or a living room, you're essentially making them do articulatory scales.
Yes.
Like a concert pianist endlessly practicing basic scales before they're allowed to play a complex Beethoven sonata. The meaning of the sentence doesn't even matter at that point. It's entirely about training the physical hardware to execute the software of the language.
That is a perfect analogy. The domestic vocabulary is the training ground for the biomechanics of fluency.
But I want to push on this transition from the physical to the abstract, because I think this is where so many learners hit a plateau and eventually just give up. Let's say I have mastered the biomechanics. I can flawlessly, with native-like intonation, say, there's a lamp on the bookcase.
Okay.
I have my big pile of tactile vocabulary. But a pile of bricks is not a house. How do we move from pointing at furniture to having a real, spontaneous, complex conversation?
This is where we have to look at the architectural blueprint of fluency, which in this context is the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. We see these labels everywhere, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, but very few people actually understand the massive cognitive shifts required to move between those levels.
The My Linguistic source provides a really sobering breakdown of the time investment required here. To reach A1, which they define as elementary proficiency, where you are basically just relying on memorized, highly rehearsed phrases like ordering an iced tea that takes about 20 to 30 hours of guided study.
Which isn't too bad.
No, but then moving to A2, where you can handle everyday routines and describe those immediate concrete surroundings we just talked about, that takes another 40 to 60 hours.
Right. So at A2, you have a functional, albeit very limited, map of reality. You can survive a trip to the supermarket.
Yeah.
You can tell your landlord that the radiator is broken.
Yeah.
But your language is entirely reactive. You are totally dependent on the other person speaking slowly, speaking clearly, and operating within your limited domain of vocabulary.
It's the linguistic equivalent of being a passenger in a car. You can look out the window and describe what you see, but you aren't actually driving. But then we look at the jump to the B levels, what the framework calls independent user status. And the time investment suddenly skyrockets. Moving from A2 to B1 takes 50 to 70 hours. And then the jump from B1 to B2 takes a staggering 100 to 150 hours of study.
It's a huge leap.
Why does the time requirement become exponential like that? What is happening in the brain between B1 and B2 that is so incredibly difficult?
What's happening is a fundamental shift in memory retrieval and processing. At the A1 and A2 levels, you are heavily relying on declarative memory.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning you are consciously recalling rules and vocabulary. You are thinking, okay, I want to talk about something that happened in the past, so I must add ed to this verb. It's a slow, deliberate, conscious process.
Which is why A2 speakers often have that agonizing pause before they answer a question. You can almost literally see the gears turning in their head as they assemble the sentence like a math equation.
Exactly. But to reach B2, which the framework defines as the ability to interact with a degree of fluency and spontaneity that makes regular interaction with native speakers quite possible without strain for either party to achieve that, the language must move from declarative memory to procedural memory.
Procedural memory.
Yeah.
Like riding a bike or driving a car. You don't consciously think about pushing the pedals. You just intend to go forward, and your body executes the mechanics automatically.
Yes. Going back to your house analogy, at B2, the electricity is finally turned on in the house you've been building. You are no longer translating thoughts from your native language into the target language. You are generating thoughts directly in the target language. The syntax evolves dramatically. You aren't just stating facts anymore. You are navigating hypotheticals.
The leap from the window is open to, if you had told me you were cold, I wouldn't have opened the window.
Yes. That sentence requires a third conditional structure, a grasp of hypothetical pasts, and an understanding of polite social reproach. The cognitive load required to generate that in real time in a second language while maintaining natural intonation. I mean, that is why it takes 150 hours to bridge that gap.
Wow.
B2 is the plateau where attrition is highest, honestly, because the sheer volume of exposure required to force that shift into procedural memory is exhausting for an adult.
So B2 is basically operational fluency. You can live, work, and socialize in the language. But the framework doesn't stop there. We still have the peaks of the mountain. C1, which is advanced, and C2, which is near native proficiency.
It's the summit.
The My Linguistics analysis notes a very specific phrase for C1 learners, the ability to recognize implicit meaning.
That is the defining characteristic of the C levels. It's no longer about what is being said, it's about what is not being said.
I think of it like the difference between playing the piano and playing jazz. A2 and B1 is hitting the right notes on the sheet music in the right order. C1 and C2 is the jazz. It's the spaces between the notes, the improvisation, the ability to bend a rule, because you understand the underlying theories so well.
That's a really brilliant way to frame it. At C1, you can read a deeply sarcastic editorial in a newspaper and understand that the author means the exact opposite of what the words literally say.
Right.
You can sit in a corporate meeting and understand that when a British executive says, "That's a very brave proposal," they aren't complimenting your courage. They are politely telling you your idea is a disaster.
Which goes right back to why the foundational mapping is so important, but also why it's so insufficient on its own. The word brave has a very concrete definition, but its implicit meaning in a specific cultural context is entirely different.
And this leads to one of the most fascinating insights from the My Linguistics text, which I think shatters a massive misconception about the CEFR scale. People tend to view C2 as the finish line. The assumption is that C2 means complete mastery, and that every native speaker is automatically a C2.
Right. That feels intuitive. If it's my native language, obviously I have complete mastery of it. I'd ace a C2 test.
But the text explicitly states that language acquisition is an infinite process, and that a significant portion of native speakers would actually fall short of C2 proficiency, particularly in written assessments or when dealing with highly specialized topics.
Wait, I have to stop you there because that sounds paradoxical. How can a native speaker fail an assessment in the language they have spoken since birth?
Because C2 goes far, far beyond basic conversational fluency. It demands a highly educated command of the language across abstract, complex, and highly specialized fields. The source provides a fantastic thought experiment for this.
Oh, let's hear it.
Consider a university student getting their PhD in history. That student can easily read incredibly dense academic texts about the geopolitical causes of the French Revolution. They understand the nuance, the implicit bias of the author, the complex and tactical structures. They are absolutely operating at a C2 level within the domain of history and humanities.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if you take that same native-speaking history student and hand them a dense, highly specialized, peer-reviewed article on quantum mechanics or maybe organic chemistry, they will likely struggle to comprehend it.
Even though all the words are technically English.
Even though it's English. They might know the foundational grammar, but the domain-specific vocabulary, the structural conventions of scientific writing, the conceptual framework, it's all alien to them. If you tested their reading comprehension based solely on that chemistry text, they would not score a C2. They might score a B2.
That is a staggering realization. It proves that literacy is actually domain-specific.
Exactly. C2 requires a flexibility and a breadth of knowledge that many native speakers simply never have a reason to develop. If you spend your life working in a bakery, you have an incredible depth of vocabulary regarding baking. But you may not possess the linguistic tools to parse a dense legal contract or a philosophical treatise. Therefore, your overall generalized proficiency might not hit the C2 metric because C2 demands universal cognitive flexibility.
So if language is this infinite domain-specific landscape, and the journey from A2 textbook grammar to C1 implicit meaning requires hundreds of hours of intense cognitive labor, How is that time actually spent? What is the mechanism for getting someone there? Because you clearly can't just hand them a bigger textbook with more grammar rules.
You really can't. Textbooks are inherently sanitized. They present language in a vacuum, stripped of ambiguity, background noise, and cultural friction. To bridge the gap to the upper levels, pedagogy relies on what the ELT news source defines as authentic materials.
Authentic materials. This is a massive buzzword in language learning, but the definition provided is crucial. These are materials created for native speakers, not for language learners. We aren't talking about a graded reader where John goes to the bank and speaks slowly to the teller. We are talking about raw, unfiltered reality, real news broadcasts, actual Netflix shows without subtitles, unedited podcasts, aggressive social media threads.
It's the introduction of chaos into the learning environment.
And the ELT news article outlines tremendous benefits to this chaos. They argue it improves learner motivation because you are interacting with topics you genuinely care about rather than generic textbook scenarios.
Right, you're engaged.
It develops cultural awareness, exposing learners to idioms, regional slang, and pop culture references that are completely absent from early education. Ultimately, it prepares the learner for real-life communication.
Because, as we established, real life doesn't come with a glossary at the bottom of the page. Native speakers mumble, they talk over each other, they use fragmented sentences. Authentic materials simulate that real-world friction.
I agree with all of that, but I want to introduce a counter-argument here.
Go for it.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If authentic materials are truly the magic bullet, if watching a real movie exposes me to more actual functional English than my textbook, then why do we need language schools or course books at all at the advanced levels? Why shouldn't a B1 learner just cancel their course, save their money, sit on their sofa, and watch HBO all day? Wouldn't raw exposure get them to C1 faster than sitting in a classroom?
That is the allure of the comprehensible input theory taken to an extreme, this idea that if you just wash your brain in enough language, you will naturally absorb it the way a child does. But adult brains just don't work that way. Unstructured exposure is rarely enough to build true, accurate proficiency, especially at the higher levels where implicit meaning is paramount.
Why not? If I hear a slang word 10 times in a movie, won't I figure it out eventually?
You might figure out a vague approximation of the meaning, sure, but you won't necessarily understand the grammatical structure underlying it, or the register of the word, whether it's polite or offensive, or how to deploy it yourself accurately in a sentence.
Oh, that makes sense. You might use it in the totally wrong context.
Exactly. And more importantly, there is a concept in linguistics called the affective filter. If a learner is thrown into a chaotic, unfiltered language environment and they are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of unknown input, their affective filter spikes. Anxiety goes up, and language acquisition completely shuts down. They hear noise, not language.
So just watching HBO might actually hinder progress because it induces cognitive overload.
Precisely. And this is exactly why rigorous course methodologies are still required. If we look at the Mobility Friends syllabus for their Advanced English C1 and C2 training course, we see a masterclass in how to manage this cognitive load. They don't just throw authentic materials at the students and walk away.
No, they explicitly state that the course utilizes a rigorous methodology combining theoretical exposition, practical work, and applied demonstrations.
Yes.
I was looking at the concrete examples from their course modules, and it is fascinating how they scaffold this experience. Take Module 5, which is titled Advanced Listening and Speaking. The syllabus states they introduce fast-paced and authentic listening, like real lectures, podcasts, and interviews, but they do it in a highly structured way.
The key word there is structured. A high-level language program acts as a cognitive safety net. Before the trainer plays that fast-paced, unedited podcast, they engage in pre-teaching.
What does that look like in practice?
They might isolate 3 complex phrasal verbs that appear in the audio. They might discuss the cultural context of the topic so the learner's brain is already primed for the semantic field. When the learner finally listens to the authentic material, they aren't drowning in chaos. They have a theoretical framework that allows them to actually extract meaning.
It changes the exercise from passive absorption to active targeted extraction.
Exactly, and the trainer provides continuous, individualized feedback, which the Mobility Friends assessment methodology heavily emphasizes. You can't get feedback from a TV screen. If you misuse an idiom you heard in a movie, the TV won't correct you.
Right.
A trained educator will monitor your output, identify the gaps in your interlanguage, and push you to use more complex structures, like, say, forcing you to use modal verbs of deduction or embedded clauses, rather than relying on the simple structures you've already mastered.
The course module that really stood out to me as incredibly unique was Module 4, Creative and Literary Language.
That one is brilliant.
They are having non-native speakers, professionals, mind you, write short stories, poetry, and interpret literary texts and figurative language. At first glance, a corporate training center teaching poetry seems utterly frivolous. If I want to learn English to negotiate a contract, why am I analyzing a sonnet?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But poetry and literature are the ultimate crucibles for implicit meaning. If you want a professional to understand the nuance of a hostile boardroom negotiation, they have to understand metaphor, tone, and subtext.
Because business language is deeply metaphorical. We talk about weathering the storm, circling the wagons, or moving the goalposts. None of those are literal.
Exactly. If you only teach literal, transactional English, your learner will be completely lost the moment a native speaker uses figurative language. Analyzing poetry forces the learner's brain to decouple words from their literal dictionary definitions, which is the A2 level skill, and analyze how words interact to create tone and emotion, which is the C1 level skill. It builds linguistic elasticity. The safety net of the classroom allows learners to wrestle with this incredibly difficult, authentic material without feeling utterly overwhelmed.
It's the difference between wandering around a foreign, chaotic city without a map, hoping you eventually learn the layout, and taking a guided tour with an expert architect who stops to show you exactly how the foundation of each building was poured, why the materials were chosen, and how the plumbing works. Both involve walking through the city, but only one gives you structural understanding.
And that structural understanding builds immense cognitive resilience.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. We have mapped the foundation, starting with the physical geometry of household vocabulary and the biomechanics of shadowing. We have charted the grueling hundreds of hours climb up the CEFR ladder, transitioning from declarative to procedural memory. We've explored how authentic materials and literary texts are used within rigorous methodologies to teach implicit meaning. We were talking about thousands of hours of intense, often frustrating cognitive labor.
It is a massive undertaking.
So what is the ultimate return on investment? Why do this? If I am the listener and I am putting in this work, what is the tangible payoff on the other side of that C1 or C2 threshold?
The return on investment is profound, and it manifests in two distinct areas. It fundamentally changes the physical architecture of your brain, and it mathematically alters your career and earning trajectory.
Let's start with the brain. The source we have from European Science Publishing outlines some staggering cognitive upgrades that occur as a direct result of this process. They discuss the development of metalinguistic awareness.
Metalinguistic awareness is a fascinating phenomenon. It is essentially the ability to step outside of language and view it as a system rather than just a reflexive tool for communication. A monolingual person rarely thinks about how their language works, they just use it. A bilingual person, especially at advanced levels, is constantly comparing two different rule systems.
How does that constant comparison physically manifest in the brain's capability?
It acts as an intense workout for the brain's executive control center, particularly the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex, which handles conflict resolution.
Conflict resolution.
Yes, because when a bilingual person goes to speak, both language systems are activated in the brain simultaneously. The brain has to actively suppress one language in order to speak the other. This constant microsecond neurological conflict resolution strengthens the brain's ability to filter out irrelevant information.
So it's literally weightlifting for your attention span.
Exactly. The European Science Publishing text points out that because of this heightened metalinguistic awareness, language learners excel in tasks requiring focused attention and multitasking. They can ignore distractions, stay mentally flexible, and switch between completely unrelated activities much faster and with fewer errors than monolinguals. Their cognitive hardware is upgraded to process competing information more efficiently.
Which is a perfect segue into the second return on investment, the bank account. Because in a modern corporate environment, the ability to filter noise, process competing information, and switch tasks rapidly is the exact definition of a high-value employee.
Which brings us to the empirical data.
Yes. Enter the blockbuster study published in the journal Computer Fraud and Security by researchers Wei Wen and Wei Cao. Now, I have to admit, when I first looked at our source stack, I was deeply confused. Why is a definitive study on language proficiency and career success published in a journal dedicated to computer fraud and cybersecurity?
It seems like a massive misprint, doesn't it?
Completely.
But when you analyze the context of modern global organizations, it makes perfect sense. The tech, finance, and security sectors are incredibly complex, high-stakes ecosystems. A catastrophic security failure or financial collapse isn't always caused by a bad line of code or a mathematical error. Very often, it is the result of a subtle breakdown in communication across a decentralized, multicultural team.
Ah, misunderstanding a subtle warning from a colleague in Tokyo because of a language barrier could lead to a vulnerability that compromises an entire network.
Exactly. In these sectors, communication is a hard security protocol. So, Wen and Cao set out to empirically measure the career impact of language and communication skills within these high-stakes environments. And they didn't just rely on anecdotal surveys, they utilized a rigorous mixed methods design. They surveyed 500 professionals and conducted in-depth qualitative interviews with 20 individuals to really get under the hood of how communication operates in the workplace.
And they use some heavy statistical machinery to process this data. The study mentions multiple regression and structural equation modeling, or SAM. Explain to me why that matters. Why is SAM better than just putting out a survey and saying, hey, it looks like bilingual people make more money?
Because a simple correlation doesn't prove causation. If you just see that bilingual people earn more, a skeptic could argue, well, maybe bilingual people just happen to be older, or maybe they all went to expensive universities and that is why they earn more.
Right, there could be 100 other reasons.
Structural equation modeling allows researchers to control for those variables. It looks at complex networks of relationships and isolates the specific impact of one variable in this case, C1 and C2 language skills on another variable, ruling out the background noise. It proves that the language skills are the driver of the success, not just a coincidence.
So, the statistical rigor established, what did the data actually show? They compared respondents who had been promoted since 2008 with their non-promoted colleagues.
The findings were definitive and undeniable. The data showed that having higher C1 and C2 level second language skills was positively and directly related to three massive career outcomes: increased promotion rates, significantly higher cumulative salary growth over time, and increased overall job satisfaction.
The holy trinity of career success. More promotions, more money, and you actually enjoy the work more. And the sector specifics are fascinating. The study emphasizes that these competencies affect the international business and finance sectors most significantly. If you are operating in global finance, your language level is a direct mathematical predictor of your earning potential and your trajectory up the corporate ladder.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, here's where we have to make a vital distinction, and it's a nuance the researchers articulate very clearly. We have to separate the concept of language mastery, which is essentially passing a grammar test, from true communication effectiveness.
Right, because we established earlier with the history student example that just knowing the words or even being a native speaker doesn't mean you can function perfectly in every scenario.
Exactly. The Wen and Cao study emphasizes that in today's modern multicultural organizations, communication effectiveness is a complex cluster of skills. It's not just having a vast vocabulary, it's the ability to share content clearly, interact appropriately within different cultural norms, cooperate seamlessly within a group, and manage complex projects across time zones.
I want to dig into those 20 qualitative interviews they conducted, because I think that's where this really comes to life. Based on the data, what does a communication breakdown actually look like for someone who has the technical skills but lacks that C1 or C2 communication effectiveness?
Let's synthesize a scenario based on their findings. Imagine a brilliant project manager. Their technical coding skills are flawless, but they only possess a B1 level of English proficiency. They're sitting in a virtual meeting with a multicultural team trying to resolve a major project delay. Because of their language barrier, they are expending so much cognitive energy just trying to translate the incoming audio that they miss the subtle, implicit cues, the hesitation in a colleague's voice, the passive-aggressive phrasing of an email.
They miss the jazz. They only hear the notes.
Exactly. And when it comes time for them to speak, they lack the linguistic nuance to politely push back on a bad idea. They either remain silent or they speak so bluntly that they accidentally offend a key stakeholder. The study explicitly notes that individuals with language barriers fail to engage in fruitful debates. They cannot express their opinions fully or modulate their tone.
And if you can't debate and you can't express nuance, you are effectively sidelined. You might be the smartest person in the room technically, but you have a reduced capacity to support team goals.
And if you cannot support team goals and you cannot navigate conflict, management is never going to promote you to a leadership position. The study establishes a direct pipeline. High communication skills yield high interpersonal effectiveness, which directly yields leadership capacity.
It is the ultimate shift from hard skills to soft skills. The researchers make a profound point about the modern economy. With automation and artificial intelligence increasingly taking over routine, technical, and analytical tasks, hard technical skills are no longer enough to guarantee job security, let alone promotion. Top-notch interpersonal skills,
Right.
cross-cultural negotiation, the ability to read the emotional temperature of a room and pivot a presentation in real time. These are the new irreplaceable standards of high-value work.
A computer algorithm can instantly translate a spreadsheet from Mandarin to English. But a computer cannot currently read the subtle, implicit hesitations in a client's voice during a high-stakes negotiation, realize the client is worried about post-merger integration, and seamlessly pivot the conversation to address those unstated fears using a carefully deployed metaphor. That requires human empathy, cultural awareness, and C1 or C2 level communication effectiveness.
So what does this all mean? Let's tie this entire journey together. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started at the literal ground floor, looking at how adult learners must first anchor abstract language to the tactile, 3D geometry of their living rooms and kitchens. We analyzed the grueling biomechanics of shadowing sentences about armchairs and bookcases, proving that the physical muscle memory of language is just as vital as the mental grammar.
We established that you have to build those physical tactile rooms before you can wire the house for electricity.
Right, and then we track that electrical wiring process, the agonizing hundreds of hours required to climb the CEFR ladder from the declarative memory of A1 to the procedural real-time synthesis of B2. We explored the infinite landscape of C1 and C2, where proficiency is domain-specific and where learners must parse implicit meaning, sarcasm, and tone.
We saw how advanced methodologies use the chaos of authentic materials, podcasts, news, and even poetry as a guided simulation of the real world, providing that vital cognitive safety net so learners can wrestle with ambiguity without their effective filters shutting them down.
And finally, we saw the tangible, measurable result of this massive undertaking. We saw how juggling these linguistic rule systems physically reshapes the executive function of the brain, granting metalinguistic awareness and hyper-focused attention. And we looked at the structural equation modeling that proves this upgraded cognitive hardware leads directly to faster promotion rates, higher salaries, and leadership roles in global finance and tech.
It completely reframes the endeavor of language learning. It's not just a hobby or a line on a resume, it is a fundamental cognitive transformation.
It really is. So, to you, the listener, what does this mean for your daily practice? It means that language is the operating system of your career. Every single hour you spend doing those articulatory scales, shadowing a basic sentence about a window or a bookcase, every hour you spend decoding a fast-paced podcast and wrestling with a metaphor, you are not just learning vocabulary, you are upgrading your own brain. You are building the cognitive capacity required to lead.
But as we close, I want to leave you with a final forward-looking thought, and it's drawn directly from the future work section of the Wakey Wen and Wakey Cow study. The researchers noted that as they look ahead, future studies must analyze the influence of advanced technologies on evaluating language abilities and interpersonal communication at work.
The shadow of artificial intelligence.
Exactly. We're entering an era where AI and automated, real-time, zero-latency translation are becoming the new standard in our workplaces. We are not far from a reality where an earpiece can instantly and flawlessly translate your colleague's spoken Japanese into your spoken English, maintaining tone and perhaps even adapting idioms on the fly.
Which raises a terrifying and fascinating question for anyone currently spending hundreds of hours studying a language.
It does. As that technology becomes ubiquitous, how will it change the fundamental value of human language acquisition? Will the sheer act of learning vocabulary and grammar become obsolete, outsourced entirely to our devices? Or will the cognitive benefits we just spent an hour discussing, that increased mental flexibility, the metalinguistic awareness, the strengthened executive function, and the profound capacity for empathy and leadership, will those internal changes become the true, irreplaceable advantage of learning a language, rather than just the transactional ability to translate words?
Will the grueling struggle of building the house be the exact thing that makes you strong enough to live in it and lead others through it?
It is something for you to deeply ponder. Because while an X-ray can easily show you a broken bone and a spreadsheet can show you a quarterly profit, neither of them can show you the internal resilience and the cognitive flexibility it took to achieve them.
And a translation app cannot replicate the cognitive wiring that makes a great empathetic leader. Keep practicing those foundational sentences. Keep training that muscle memory and keep pushing into the murky, infinite waters of growth. Until next time.